In Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet, two teenagers fall in love at first sight. Then, in Act 2, they privately meet on a balcony and develop that love, away from the influence of their families or the community of their city. Then, at the end of that act, they get married. Marriage, in a general sense, is a public acknowledgement of private love. On one level, it's a legal contract wherein the church and state acknowledge the bond between two individuals. On another level, it's a ceremony wherein the friends and family of a couple publicly witness the promises made between the two individuals. In both cases, marriage serves a public function. But notably, in Romeo and Juliet, this contract, this public ceremony, is not done publicly at all. It's a secret marriage. They can't get married in a public ceremony because their families would never allow it, and they have a public duty to obey the will of their family. And there's a paradox in there, I think. The institution of marriage, meant to publicly validate love within a community, is inaccessible to Romeo and Juliet because their love defies the very community structures that should celebrate it. And this reveals something I think is central to Romeo and Juliet. It's a play about the tension between individual desires and social norms. It's about the ways our communities fail to accommodate or satisfy or support our individual subjectivities. And in Act 4, Juliet specifically suffers the consequences within 5 short scenes that move back and forth between public and private spaces. And that is the topic of today's video. And if this sounds like it's your kind of thing and you want to join me in this deep dive of Romeo and Juliet and its themes, please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos. And with that out of the way, let's do Act 4. Act 4 begins with Paris explaining to Friar Lawrence that Juliet won't stop crying, and so it's impossible for him to talk of love and get a clear acknowledgement of Juliet's consent. So Paris says that Daddy Capulet, in his wisdom, hastes our marriage to stop the inundation of her tears, which, too much minded by herself alone, may be put from her by society. Daddy Capulet believes that they can stop her private sorrows by coming together as a community to celebrate her marriage. And there's obviously a lot of dramatic irony going on here. This marriage, intended to help her overcome the loss of her dead cousin, will actually end up triggering the tragedy that we know is coming since the prologue. When Juliet enters the scene, it's clear that she is entirely alone. It seems like every single line that she delivers in the scene has 2 meanings, one intended for the public and the other intended for herself. Like Paris greets her arrival by saying, "Happily met, my lady and my wife," and she responds, "That may be, sir, when I may be a wife." So she's maybe a wife. And we in the audience and Friar Lawrence know that she is, indeed, already a wife. Juliet cannot publicly deny Paris, but she also cannot privately accept the situation. Her internal conflict is expressed publicly through all those double meanings. When Paris leaves, Juliet at first threatens to end her own life. She cannot marry Paris, and the only other option that she can see is an escape through death. But she also realizes that both these options allow her family to define her. Her family does not treat her like an autonomous human being with desires of her own. For them, she is not a living creature. So she either marries the man that they want her to marry, or they will find her the way that they use her, as an empty vessel, dead. The way that she sees it, in both options, she's a lifeless body, and she would prefer not to be a lifeless body, so she asks the friar for a third option. And the friar outlines a crazy plan. She's going to take a potion that will make her appear lifeless. She will be buried in the Capulet tomb, and the friar will arrange for Romeo to meet her there when she awakes from the effects of that potion. It's an extremely heavy scene, with Juliet praying that love gives her the strength to carry out this obviously terrifying plan. Remember, she's only 13, and she's about to take a potion that will, in the best case, result in her waking up in a tomb of all of her decaying ancestors. And so, the tonal shift between the end of this scene and the start of the next scene should be jarring. We move from private pain to public celebration. We go from witnessing a 13-year-old girl praying for strength in difficult times to Daddy Capulet setting up for a party and bantering with one of his serving men. And of course, silly banter is never just silly banter in a Shakespeare play. The serving man promises he'll hire good cooks because he'll make sure that they lick their fingers, which is a funny thing to say, but he justifies it, "'Tis an ill cook that cannot lick his own fingers," implying that good cooks know how to judge their own efforts, that they have the self-awareness to honestly assess the results of their actions. If we're being attentive audience members, we might realize that Daddy Capulet actually needs to hear this advice. We just witnessed the result of his decision to force his daughter to marry Paris, and he does not seem to understand the effects of his own efforts. He should do well to lick his own fingers, taste the soup that he's making. Directly after this, Juliet enters the scene and fully submits to her father. She is publicly obedient while possessing the potion, a private disobedience. Daddy Capulet becomes so happy that he decides to move the wedding day to Wednesday, not Thursday, so everything becomes even more urgent as we head into Scene 3. Scene 3 begins with Juliet dismissing both the nurse and her mother so she can be by herself. I mean, she's emotionally been by herself since the end of Act 3, but now she needs to be physically by herself. This is a powerful scene and a powerful soliloquy. She's been told her entire life that she should strive for marriage and, to a lesser extent, love. When she met Romeo, she fulfilled that social conditioning. She became a wife and satisfied that purpose, the purpose that the nurse's husband joked about as soon as she could walk. But that same community that helped condition her aims and desires for marriage would be unable to reconcile her individual decision to marry Romeo with their vision for her. The community that she needs to support her cannot, and they do not. Appropriately, she imagines that she will wake up in the tomb of her ancestors and be attacked by Tybalt, her cousin. She imagines that he will use the bones of her ancestors to dash out her brains. This vision is about how she feels the hostility of her community, which cannot and will not accept her individuality. So she takes the potion and faints, and that's heavy. That's a difficult way to end a scene. A child alone on stage, a quick meditation on being brained by one's own dead cousin in a tomb filled with death, followed by throwing back an experimental potion. Drop the curtain. So of course, the next scene begins with celebration. Lots of joyful people on stage. In this act, we are thrown back and forth between private grieving and public celebration. Juliet is privately in pain in Scene 3. Everybody is happy and joking around in Scene 4. There's going to be a wedding. Only we, in the audience, know that all these efforts are futile. There won't be a wedding. So on to Scene 5. The nurse enters Juliet's room and tries to wake her, and she quickly understands Juliet to be dead, and the tone shifts very quickly from celebration to mourning. Daddy Capulet enters and is distraught. He says, "Death is my son-in-law. Death is my heir. My daughter he hath wedded." So the potion worked. They all believe Juliet to be dead, and they are inconsolable. But the friar tries to console them anyway. He says, "The most you sought was her promotion, for 'twas your heaven she should be advanced. And weep you now, seeing she is advanced above the clouds, as high as heaven itself. Oh, in this love you love your child so ill that you run mad, seeing that she is well." And these are fascinating lines. He says that they wanted her to grow up and marry well, to move up in the world. They wanted her to advance in status. Well, now she is in heaven, so they shouldn't be so upset. But there's also a second way to interpret these lines. They wanted her to grow up and marry well, somebody from a good family. As they look on her now, she is in fact married to a member of a good family, and for some reason, they're upset. They weep now, seeing that she is advanced. Daddy Capulet thinks that he's talking about heaven, but we, in the audience, know that he's talking about Romeo. The friar says, "Oh, in this love you love your child so ill that you run mad, seeing that she is well." He's accusing them of having a selfish form of love for her. If they cared enough, they could have seen that she is well, that she was making individual decisions that should make both her and the family happy. The expectation is that she'd grow up and marry well, and she did, yet it wasn't the way that they wanted it. Of course, the family doesn't know about this subtext. This is just something that we in the audience share with Friar Lawrence alone. We know that Juliet's family has not exactly treated her as an actual living human being with her own desires. The friar's plan will reveal their love to be empty, just like the tomb that they're going to find her in a few days if all goes to plan. They never listened to or loved her for her. They only loved having a daughter, not the individual who occupied the position of daughter. As an individual, she was already dead to them. Anyway, now they need to cancel the party, or at least repurpose the party from wedding to funeral. Daddy Capulet orders that all things we ordained festive turn from their office to black funeral, our instruments to melancholy bells, our wedding cheer to a sad burial feast, our solemn hymns to sullen dirges change, our bridal flowers serve for a buried corse, and all things change them to the contrary. And this sets up an interesting meditation on the arts. Instead of playing solemn hymns to celebrate a marriage, the musicians will pack up and be replaced by sullen dirges, melancholy bells. We look to the arts to transform our public spaces to reflect our inner emotions. And then, enter Will Kempe, the clown. The edition that you're reading probably says Enter Peter, and it is Peter, but one of the most reliable early printings of this play, the second quarto, has the stage direction say Enter Will Kempe, who, at the time, would have been possibly more famous than Will Shakespeare. Will Kempe was a comedic actor known for his dancing and physical comedy. He was one of those actors that could get people laughing just by showing up. So again, we get a tone shift, but it's more than that. This strange interaction between Peter and the musicians complicates the narrative of public performance and private interpretation that we've been given so far. Peter asks the musicians to play a song called Heart's Ease, a joyful song. He says that he needs a joyful song because he needs to be cheered up, and music can do that. Art can do that. It can transform our mood, just as this play has done. It began as a comedy, but it's becoming a real downer. The musicians refuse Peter's request, and they begin to argue. After making a bunch of terrible music puns and then attempting to sing and dance himself into a better mood, Peter eventually tells the musicians that he understands a line from one of their songs better than they do. It's a line about music having a silver sound. This whole thing is just a silly fight. It's a sad attempt at comic relief, but it also says something about private interpretations of public statements. As an individual, Peter claims to have a better understanding of a song than the community of musicians who produced that song. It's a mundane claim, but it reflects the more serious action of the main plot. The Capulet family has told Juliet that she's old enough to be married. They told her that she was ready for that kind of commitment and responsibility. That's the song that they sang to her, and she listened. But she also had her own interpretation of that song. And when it's Juliet, I think it's safe to say that we're all on her side. She should have the freedom to make her own decisions, to call the next song, to have a heart at ease. But Shakespeare is never simple. He gives us Peter, a fool, to show us that these sympathies can't be universalized, that there is a point at which you cannot confidently interpret a song any way you want. There is a point where subjective interpretation becomes foolish and unnecessarily combative. Juliet's private desires were guided by public expectation, but only to a certain point. This play lives in the space between those public duties and those private desires, and it's an exploration of how our communities fail to accommodate or satisfy or support that individual subjectivity. But that's not the only thing that this play is about. It's also about the way that chance encounters can disrupt the best laid plans. The Capulets possibly could have guided Juliet toward a marriage with Paris successfully, had a serving man not fatefully have asked a young Montague to read the guest list way back in Act 1. This play has a series of chance encounters and fateful obstacles like this, moments when the outside world interferes in the lives of individuals by chance and circumstance. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video, the role of fate and free will, as we take on Act 5 of Romeo and Juliet play-by-play. Please subscribe to be notified when that video is released, and thank you for watching.